Okay, so in the first video, we went through the variables for the class. The static ones that belong to the class, we skipped public static game. We'll talk about that later. All of the variables that belong to the instance of the class. We talked about the main method, which just basically cookie cutter the way we set up every JFrame application. We talked about the constructor, which initialized all the instance variables. In the next, we skipped over the dice placed method. We'll go back to that when we talk about the player. We went through in the next video the paint method, and now we're going to talk about action performed and item state changed. So remember that we implement action listener. Action listener requires us to implement the action performed method. An item listener requires us to implement the item state changed method. Once we have implemented those interfaces, that enables us to register this thing to listen to events. So by implementing the action listener interface and implementing that action performed method, we can then add our game as an action listener for the button. And by implementing the item listener interface, we can then add our game as an item listener for our checkboxes. So the action performed method will get called when they click on the button because it's been registered to the button. The item state changed method will get called when they click on a checkbox because it's been registered with all the checkboxes. So action performed. When they click the roll button, we want to roll the dice. So we're going to go through in a for loop each of the dice in the array of all the dice and tell the dice to roll themselves. And we implement that roll method inside of the dice class. We increase the roll count. Okay, so if it's player one's turn, he had rolled once. He just clicked the roll button, roll count's going to go up to 2. And if it's 2, it'll go up to 3. Now, if roll count has just gone up to 3, we want to do some bookkeeping. We set roll button enabled to false. That disables the roll button. We'll enable it later when they place the score somewhere. We also enable the roll button as soon as someone checks one of the check boxes to select the number of players. But in the action performed, when they roll the dice after the third roll, that button gets disabled. And then, if it's the third roll, okay, they've rolled 3 times, roll count has just gone up to 3, the player whose turn it is then told to place dice. So we're going to implement the place dice method inside of the player class. And he needs to know what dice to place. And so we're going to pass my dice, or the dice, to the player. So he has a dice method that we've implemented, and he's passing the dice as a parameter to that method. And then we repaint. So whenever we roll the dice are going to change, but we want to call the paint method again. And the paint method gets called whenever we call repaint. And so that repaints the JFrame. And so that's everything. That's the entire action performed. So when they click the roll button, what happens? It rolls all the dice, increases the roll count. If the roll count has gone up to 3, we disable the roll button, tell the player to place the dice, and then every time they click on the roll button, the very last thing that's done is we repaint the app. Item state changed. Now this method gets called whenever they click on a checkbox. It receives an item event. One of the methods of an item event is a getSource method. It's a reference to the item whose state changed. So they click on a checkbox, that changes the state of the checkbox. It puts a check in it. And then if there's a listener on that checkbox, it'll then call the item state changed method for that listener, giving it an item event. We get the source, the check, which is the checkbox that triggered this method call. We're going to go through in a loop and check to see which of these checkboxes. So this is the array that holds the checkboxes. We're going through them one at a time. And remember, we left item space 0 empty. So it's just going to go through the indexes 1 through 6 and check to see which one of them is equal to the source. Okay? As soon as it finds a checkbox that's equal to the source, it sets the number of players to the index of that checkbox. So if that checkbox was at index 2, that means they clicked on the checkbox that had a 2 next to it. And it's going to set the number of players to 2. Now this system.out.println, I just had that there when I was originally writing my code. I didn't write this all at once. I wrote it little by little by little. And I used print statements along the way. And sometimes I forget to remove them. And that just output some information in the console so that I could see that the amount of the code that I had just written was doing what I wanted it to do. As it's going through this loop, now we know they've checked one of the check boxes. We don't want them to ever check the boxes again. Remove is a method that our game inherits from JFrame. Remember, we can add widgets to the JFrame. We can also remove widgets from the game, the JFrame. So we're removing the checkboxes from our screen so that they can't click them again. So as soon as they click on a checkbox, all the checkboxes disappear. We set roll count to 1. Remember, roll count starts out at 0, and as soon as the game starts, it immediately goes to 1, and then it will cycle through 1, 2, 3. Roll 1, then 2, then 3. And it enables the roll button. So this is the first time the roll button gets enabled. So it's player 0's turn. Roll count is set to 1. It enables the button. The background start game. So when those checkboxes are visible, the background is displaying the instructions for the game. I've created a start game method that tells the background to switch. It switches state. It switches from displaying the rules to displaying the scorecard. And so that start game method is the method that we use in our background to tell it to start displaying the scorecard. And then we just go through our dice and tell them all to reset. Some of them might have already been selected. Some of them, I've got a reset method inside of the dice that is going to reset the dice, make them not selected, and roll them so that they're all been rolled fresh with some random value. And then we repaint the screen. Whenever we change things, we change the way they look on the screen, we're just going to call repaint so that we can make sure that those changes are all triggered and visible on the screen. Okay, so that's the item state change. That's the method that handles the clicks on the checkboxes, and the action performed, the method that handles the clicks on the roll button. The one method that we have skipped over is this dice placed, and we'll explain that and the public static game G variable when we get to explaining the player class. In the next video, I will probably explain the dice or the background, because those are simpler classes, and I'll record the player video last. Although you should be able to watch the videos in whatever order you choose.